Nut Nerd Podcast, Episode 237, Apple's WWDC 2020.
Welcome to the Not Nerd Podcast. I'm Nate Heath, and we're here to help you tech better. Today we've got our special WWDC coverage. Here with me, as always, Mr. Dave Baylor.
Well, hello to you, sir. Yes, Apple announced some pretty interesting things today, and we're going to try to get through all of it. But yes, I've been eagerly waiting and anticipating Worldwide Developers Conference 2020. This is where Apple connects directly with developers and gives them kind of a roadmap of what is happening with the hardware and software over the next few months until the new operating systems are released later this fall. So This is the time where developers need to pay attention and get the tools and start updating and developing new apps.
Yes. And I did look through the rest of the tech news this week, and there's nothing that can't wait until next week. So we'll get back to our regularly scheduled programming next week. I don't like when they do these on Monday. I had a very busy Monday today, so I was watching the video stream with you remotely, and then what did they go? It was about an hour, 45 minutes?
Yeah, it was almost 2 hours. I would say an hour 45 was the core content.
Yes, and we will link in the show notes if you want to watch the whole thing yourself, but we will try to summarize anything you might need to know about what they announced. There was, as we had heard rumors in the last day or so, no new hardware announced, which is a little disappointing. No AirPods, no new Apple TV, no new computers, but that's not to say that stuff couldn't come soon. And they just didn't use their very tightly packed keynote address, and this is different than any previous year because nobody was in the Steve Jobs theater this time. They used a lot of drone footage and fun cuts between the different speakers and pre-recorded everything.
Yeah, it was like it gave the audience a virtual tour of the campus. They started out down in the theater and then moved to the exhibition space, and then upstairs of the exhibition space is kind of a foyer, and then they went on campus and then to some secret undisclosed locations, and the audience was zoomed back and forth, as you said, via innovative camera techniques and drone footage. And they seem to put this together rather quickly. I mean, they've had a few months to prepare for it, but they were planning on doing everything on stage, and so they had to take their announcements and turn them into basically a short film describing everything. And it was very high quality and very fun and interesting to watch. And honestly, I think I would prefer this to bringing in, here's a game developer who's going to give you 5 minutes of a guy jumping around on platforms and tell you how close to the metal they've developed their applications so that they run smooth. This was just very informative and gave some real insight to what is going on at Apple.
Yeah, and it was more efficient with no applause breaks.
That's true. I hadn't considered that.
Well, let's get into it. We started off, Tim Cook was on stage in an empty theater, and he touched on a couple big things going on in our world between Black Lives Matter and COVID-19 crisis, and talked about some of the initiatives that they've been doing. Was there anything else in that intro?
He just described the initiatives that Apple is already doing regarding black and brown members of their staff and organizations around the world that they're supporting. And so they are very committed to equality at Apple. And then regarding COVID-19, just, addressing what's going on in the world. But he took that time and then quickly spun it off to Craig Federighi, who pretty much was the MC for the entire rest of the keynote. And the first thing Craig wanted to talk about, which is near and dear to all of our hearts because it's going to impact every iPhone, iPad, Apple TV, Apple Watch. It's the new iOS 14 and its many flavors. Like I said, there's the Apple TV, the Watch, there's the iPad version, but it's all really just iOS 14 distributed on different devices.
Yeah.
But some of the cool things right out of the bat, widgets.
Yeah.
You Maybe explain to us what your vision of a widget is.
Yeah, so it's basically, if you're familiar with Android, there's similar things there, but it allows app developers, and Apple's obviously creating them for their own apps, these widgets. So instead of just the same kind of basic layout of the home screen that we've had since 2007 from the first iPhone, where you just have a list of your icons, now they have widgets. So let's take the weather app. It would be, almost what you see on the home, not the home screen, whatever, the notification center, where you get some details, or your calendar. So it really expands that and is going to make the home screen a lot more dynamic. And so you can choose which widgets you want to show. There's a drawer that can come down with widgets, and it can automatically adjust widgets throughout the day. So maybe in the morning it has your weather and your calendar that you could swipe through. And then after that, in the afternoon, it's got your dinner reservation or, open table. There's just a ton. I think this is going to be really fun and really be a fresh new interface for iOS.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm getting really tired of just square icons on the front page. I mean, there's a little panel that you can slide over with notifications, and it's all confusing. Now it's going to give users command of their homepage where they can put everything they want. If they just want widgets on the first screen and no apps, you can do that.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
Yeah, and they're also adding an app library where it will kind of automatically put all of your apps into folders. If you have many, you can hide pages of apps and just use this app library. You can search that. It'll give you suggestions, and kind of a pretty big redesign of the home screen and how you interact with your iPhone, and then it'll be on the iPad OS as well with many of these things. The Today view, and and then one of the other big things is picture-in-picture. So if you're watching a video, you'll be able to watch that. So if you're playing Candy Crush, you could also be watching some Not Nerd videos or anything. And so that's going to be really nice on the iPhone. You've had some picture-in-picture stuff on iPad, but to have it on the iPhone, and you can resize it, you can slide it over to the side. Oh, man.
Yeah, I sometimes do various tasks on the iPad just so I can have a picture-in-picture because my phone can't do it. And now I might be able to do more things with my phone. And for users of the large version of the iPhone, it may preclude having to use an iPad at all.
That's true.
If they can do everything on their phone with a larger screen and the more refined application of the picture-in-picture. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yes, and I think this next item, there was a audible gasp from you of joy. They are changing Siri and making it a more compact design. You have talked many times about how frustrated you get when you're in your car, you ask Siri something and then it just stays on this full screen thing. Whereas now it'll just be, the little Siri animation on a little bottom part of the screen, or it'll show you a little information at the top. It won't take over your phone.
And I hope, I wasn't clear from the presentation, but I hope when you evoke Siri and she splashes onto your screen, that once you're done speaking with her, that she'll quietly back away and go into the background. And yes, I have complained before. I'm in my car, I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm following a map somewhere, and I'll say, "Hey, device, play me a song on XYZ," and she'll pop up her screen, and I have to actively go over and turn off that screen to get back to my map, thus making my driving unsafe. I do not want to do that. So I'm so glad that these changes are being made.
Yeah, and they're also adding some dictation on device. So the Siri dictation will be happening on your device, and translation. And I will say a lot of this stuff, we're at the first pass now. We'll be learning a lot more over the week on some of the details. So we'll probably talk about stuff more next week, but they are making some improvements to Siri, which seem like they're going to be very nice.
Yeah, dictation on device is huge, because if you've ever been sitting there and you ask her a question and she waits and she waits, it's because it's sending that information to a server somewhere in some undisclosed location around the planet, doing the work and then sending it back. And that can take a long time. on device, it can be immediate. And I'm really looking forward to that change.
Yes. Then messages, they're making a lot of improvements to messages. We all, or most of us, spend a lot of time there, text messaging and the like. They're doing conversations where you could pin certain conversations to the top. The group conversations will have some more features where you could have a conversation within it. New Memoji with more options, more people, more hairstyles. I wonder if
face masks.
Yes, face masks. If they'll get my facial hair a little more accurate yet. I'm a pretty edge case on that.
Yeah, I see some people's Memojis and I'm like, that does not look anything like you.
Nope. And the mentions, and so messages is getting a really big upgrade, which is exciting when we get to Mac OS as well.
Next on the docket is Maps. They've updated Maps. You may or may not have noticed that last fall they started rolling out the new Maps to much of the U.S. I think all of the U.S. by now.
Yeah.
But it's higher resolution imagery, 3D buildings, more accurate directions and those type of things. And I've been using Maps kind of exclusively since like probably the middle of last year, anticipating these rollouts. And it's been wonderful. It's taken me where I need to go every time.
Yeah.
And if you remember back when Maps from Apple first started, it was terrible.
Yes.
People were getting lost in the desert, etc. But in addition to the update that's going around to more countries around the world, there are new options for guides to give more information. I think it's kind of like a Yelp or a Foursquare, some of those type of integrations. Google has Google Guides, and this is kind of a guides system. There's cycling. For all of you cyclists out there, Nate and I kind of chuckled on that. We don't cycle a lot. But giving information about what roads have bike lanes and other amenities for bicyclists, which is going to be safer for both drivers and bikers. Electric vehicle routing. I don't have an electric vehicle, but you can imagine you're going on a trip and you're like, I'm getting low on power. Where's the next power station? How long is it going to take me to get there? I've got a headwind, so I didn't anticipate that. So it gives you all of those analytics about where the charging stations are. It takes into account the elevations because it's going to take more energy to go up an incline. So that's really great. And this one was intriguing. The China license plate storage. Apparently in China, you can only drive in certain areas at certain times. And so you can put your license plate in the phone. It'll check against a database when you're trying to do a route, and it will confirm with the database whether you were allowed to travel on that day at that time. So I thought that was intriguing.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, who knew? And then they got onto CarPlay, which I do not have a vehicle with CarPlay, but I might start looking at a new one. They announced some just updates to the interface and parking, EV charging again, food ordering. But the exciting thing that I believe we talked about before is that they are going to have the basically your iPhone becomes your car keys to unlock the car and start the car. So instead of having to carry a fob, you would just have to have your device. And they're working with industry standards. And next year, so maybe my car will hold on another year and I'll start saving my pennies.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. My friend of mine has a Tesla, and he's able to just take his phone, and there's no key.
Yeah.
It's configured to an application on your phone, and he can get in there, and his family members have their phones as well, and when they approach and get in the car, it unlocks and it sets the seat, air conditioning and everything, the steering wheel as set for them. And so this is kind of taking that technology to all vehicles. And so one day when you buy a new car, it's not going to have those expensive $300 key fobs that only the dealer can give to you. It's just like, what's your phone number? I'll send you the link, and then there you go.
Yeah, no, that's pretty exciting stuff there. My parents actually just bought a nearly new vehicle that has AirPlay, or CarPlay, but I haven't gotten to play around with it yet. So
yeah, I played with it a little bit. It's pretty cool.
Then they got onto the App Store, and they've got a new feature called App Clips, where, like, let's say you walked into a restaurant and they didn't want to hand you a paper menu and they had an app. You could just tap a little device or a QR code, and it would bring up just part of an app that you would need to get the menu or something like that, and it will just pop up. It's kind of like the beacons stuff
Right.
a little bit, but it's kind of a part of an app.
Yeah, these are ultra small. They're less than 10 megabytes in size. And so on any carrier, on any plan that you have, downloading and installing one of these apps, it's just very minute. And so if you are at a place and they, like you said, they have a menu or they have some type of functionality built in, you can just easily scan something. It downloads the app real quick. You can interact with it. And when you're done using it, it'll just disappear after a while.
Yeah, no, that will be a very nice thing for that. And then they moved on to iPad OS 14, which is getting many of the same things as iOS. They're still tied together as far as the widgets, but they're updating the user interface, and from what they showed us, it looks like it's going to be some nice additions, some more sidebars, using the real estate more efficiently for the larger screen on an iPad, which just makes sense. So they're continuing that.
And there were some drag and drop features where you can hold on a button and drag that weren't previously there in various menus.
Yeah, so full screen player and music. They're really doing. We had kind of talked about it before. We weren't sure what revolutionary things. Obviously, the widgets is a pretty big change, but a lot of the rest of the stuff, it just looks like they're taking the user interface and making it better, more usable, and kind of making the iPad even, checking those things off the list to make it more functional as a full computing device, which is what people want.
Yeah, absolutely. And next off was Siri. Same thing on iPad OS as it was on the iPhone. You've got that giant screen, and it was so frustrating when you'd get a phone call or a FaceTime call, and it would just take up the entire screen. Yes. Then you'd have to exit the screen and go back to what you're doing. So that's been improved, and I'm certainly looking forward to that. And we touched on it on iOS, but iPad OS and iOS both have a great search function where now you're going to be able to drag down in the middle. You used to be able to drag down in the middle of your home screen, get your search functionality. Now apparently you can access this from on top of the applications as well. So if you're in the middle of, a Zoom meeting and you wanted to do a search, so you should be able to call up the search field and do your work without exiting the application, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, and then one of the things I had not heard anything about before this was improvements to the Apple Pencil. And so they're doing handwriting improvements, and you can handwrite on your iPad with the Apple Pencil, and then that turns it into machine-readable text, so you can sketch something in a note and then copy and paste that text somewhere else. And you can text, or you can just write in the address bar of Safari. If you want to go to a website address, you just use the pencil, scribble it out, and then it will convert it and go to the website for you. So I think this is going to be a really cool feature and take the Apple Pencil to the next level.
Yeah, this makes so much sense. Let's say you're using Procreate to draw a picture and you're like, oh no, I need to get milk from the store. You can just quickly either use your voice to add a reminder, but you can open up the application, hit a new reminder tap the plus button with your pencil, and then just scribble in what you want to buy, and it'll convert it to text on your list. Yeah. And you go right back without ever having to let go of your pencil and pick up the keyboard. So it's really, really a nice feature.
Yep. They're adding multiple language support to that, and it will do data detectors. So if you chicken scratch a phone number, you can just click on that to call and that kind of stuff. So
or if you write down an address in the notes, it'll convert it to a proper address that you click on, and it opens up the map application, for example.
Yes, that was pretty cool. Well, then they moved on to, I don't know where this falls into operating systems, much like the Pencil, but AirPods, and they're adding some new features. There was a little bit of this before, but auto switching to new device. So if you're listening to a podcast on your phone, you pause that, you pull up a video on your iPad, it'll start playing that. And then if you jump on a Zoom call on your Mac, it'll switch over to that. And that's coming to all the AirPods. So that will be a really nice feature.
Yeah, that's a software implementation that they're doing across the board. So it's kind of nice.
Between the operating systems. Then on the AirPods Pro, they are adding spatial audio. So apparently there's gyrometers or whatever we call them in the AirPods Pro. So as you turn your head, if you're watching a video, it'll adjust for the surround sound. Now, I don't have AirPods Pro. I don't watch a lot of surround sound movies on my devices with headphones in, but it looks like pretty cool technology they're doing here.
Yeah, this seemed like it was a little bit of a technology that was invented trying to find an application.
Yeah.
Because I have never been holding my iPad, wearing my AirPods, and thinking, oh, when I look over to the left, because somebody walked into the room, my stereo field is not updating with the turn of my head. Or if I lay my iPad down at an angle, it's not adjusting for the surround sound. These are things I've never really thought about. I'm sure it's really cool. But I think the goal is to immerse listeners into the experience, and it's just something that happens passively that they don't even notice. But hopefully it'll provide a better experience for people who have AirPod Pros and who want to listen to surround sound. Yeah. I got the regular ones, and so it's just stereo for me. So we'll have to see when I upgrade.
Yes. There was no mention of augmented reality per se, as they have done for the past several years, but this could play into the augmented reality stuff and virtual reality as that comes in, that you would have that
I think that's a great observation.
In the space. After that, we moved on to WatchOS, and they talked about some of the new features there with fitness. You can now, dance and strength training. So they're adding a lot more of the stuff that people are doing for workouts and more sensors in there, so it'll more accurately keep track of your workouts and fill your circles for you.
Yeah, Apple's a little slow. They're finally getting to what people kind of thought the Apple Watch should do when it first came out, is basically be a fitness tracker.
Yeah.
They tried to make it all these other things. They named some of the applications kind of weird. Now they're fully on, hey, we are basically Apple's version of a Fitbit. There's the activity rings is no longer the activity app. It's now fitness.
Yes.
They've got a whole new series of complications that you can have multiple iterations of the same application on the same watch face. So they had a bunch of fitness and exercise examples. If you have like the Nike Plus app and you want to track steps, but you also want to track whatever else. I'm not a huge exercise person, so maybe that was a bad example. But I mean, for an example that I use is like weather. You can display the temperature, you can display the conditions, you can display like the air quality. Well, now on one watch face, you can have 4 of those in there.
Yeah.
And maybe before you weren't able to. I'm not exactly sure.
I think like on the weather app you could, but definitely not with any third-party apps. So I think it's really going to give some great customization for people that use maybe their watch for specific apps. They showed like some sort of baby parenting app, and you could have, like the baby monitor or, something else, how long it's been since you've changed them, or if you need to feed them. So it really, people have wanted custom watch faces for a long time, and I think this is kind of a move in that direction, and they've created some really great ways to share it. So you can, if you are, say, that baby app, you can create a watch face that you think people are going to want to use. You just go to the website, click a button, and on your phone, it will install it to the watch, or you could share them on social media.
Or let's say you're out to dinner and I'm like, oh, that's a cool watch face. What is that? And it's like, oh, it's XYZ app and this and that. And they can just share it right over to your watch. And you're like, that is so cool.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to this because, I know a lot of people who have Apple Watches, and I'm sure they're doing innovative things with different watch faces and stuff. And now instead of me trying to recreate it, or it's like, well, I don't have that app, I don't want to go download it. Now they can just send it to your wrist, and you have the opportunity to download the apps right there on the spot. Or if they're for pay, you could purchase them, of course. So yeah, that is a really neat update to the watch interface.
Yes, and the cycling of the maps will be coming to the Apple Watch as well, which you can imagine if you are cycling, having that on your Apple Watch instead of having to pull your phone out for directions. Yeah. But they are doing some other improvements to the maps. And then, the workouts like I talked about, the dance with advanced sensor fusion. So it'll tell if you're dancing with your arms or your legs or what you're doing. So all those cloggers will get their credit too.
Yeah, the lady was moving around. I do various dancing games on Xbox and stuff. And so it's neat that they recognize those things, because I remember you guys were laughing at me because I put dance on there for one of my workouts. And you're like, what is that? And it's like, well, I'm doing a dance game. But I think the buried lead here on all the watch is sleep tracking.
Yeah.
This is a huge hole that the Apple Watch has had for a long time, and third parties have been trying to fill this hole, but they don't have the full integration of all the different accelerometers and all these things that Apple might have otherwise. And so Apple has just built this technology into the watch, into the phone, so that you can do sleep tracking. There's apps that go along with it. And I'm sure that third parties are going to be able to access that API to put that information into their own sleep tracking apps. So they're not going to go away. And that's great because I've purchased many of them over the years, and I'm looking forward to continuing to use them.
Yes, yeah. So a lot of new sleep tracking features with their own kind of built-in thing that'll be great. And it'll also be available on the iPhone without the watch, which is kind of interesting that you'd be able to do that. But they've got a new screen, so it goes dim and only will light up, very dimly at nighttime, which will also save on battery on the newer watches. And
yeah, I think they called it the wind down.
Yes.
And it is a series of screens and shortcuts and various things you can do to help you kind of get ready for bed. And it's customizable, but it's part of this sleep tracking interface. It starts out with this wind down screen and goes through the night. And then on the other end, there's a wake up routine and shortcuts and interface that is part of this as well.
Yeah, I will definitely be using that.
And before we move on to the next item, don't forget there's automatic hand washing detection.
Oh, yes.
If it notices you're washing your hands, it'll throw up a timer and an animation that like soap bubbles or something.
Yes.
And if you're not washing long enough, it'll remind you, hey, 2 more minutes of washing or whatever. I am very suspect on whether this is going to work well, but it was fun nonetheless. But it's part of the watch operating system.
Yes, good point. And they moved on to privacy. They kind of drug things on before they got to Mac OS and just continued. I mean, we know that Apple does an amazing job with privacy, and they're continuing to do that. They're doing more on-device intelligence, security protections, data minimization, transparency and control. They're continuing to upgrade the sign-in with Apple, where you could sign up for a new service with Apple, and they're actually adding in a function where you can upgrade your current login to sign in with Apple.
Yes.
So if you had signed up with Facebook before, per se, which we all know and Dave loathes, so you could switch that over to a sign in with Apple, which is very secure. They really respect your privacy. So I think that's really going to be a good thing. And they've also got some new app privacy, like a nutrition label is the example they used, where if you can look for an app and it will give you details on all of the data that app is using. Now, you mentioned while we were watching the live stream that it will be kind of up to the developer to put some of that information in there, but I'm guessing Apple will probably over time require, hey, you've got to do this right. If we find out that you're misleading us on which information you're presenting, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, my guess is they're going to implement this policy that says, hey, you need to put this information in there. And there's also going to be a clause that says, if we discover that you're being untruthful about the information you're giving us, there will be consequences. Yeah. And so it's going to kind of be on the honor system, but there's probably going to be a consequence if they don't follow it. So a lot of applications aren't going to like this. They're not going to like putting on there, like Facebook is not going to like, we sell every single piece of your data to third parties, and it includes, and there's like 12 pages of stuff that they have to list on there. So I'm sure they'll get around it somehow, but it's Apple's dedication to helping their customers retain their private information that's really commendable, and it goes right down to every core software and service that they offer.
Yes. And then up next was the Apple Home stuff. So the smart home stuff that Apple does, and they talked a little bit about the alliance with Amazon and Google and more companies for a smart home compatibility standard, so that more stuff will work together, and it can be, again, the ease of use and the privacy and stuff will work better together, which the smart home stuff, a lot of it that we talk about, it can be pretty confusing.
Yeah.
and some new updates to the Home app where you control all this. It'll suggest automations when you add new devices. It'll give you new visual stati. Is that the plural of status? Statuses.
I'm not sure.
I just might have made up another word.
Yeah.
But, adaptive lighting, all of this stuff, cameras with zones and facial recognition and all of these different things. So really it seems like a great update to the Apple Home stuff that they're doing.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of Apple Home related devices, but I do know that through Amazon, when I plug in various Works with Alexa devices, the Alexa app has many features where you can change the color temperature of a bulb or change the color if it's a multicolored bulb, or you can do various things. You can do all those within the Alexa app. The Home application has kind of been behind on some of that stuff. So it feels like that they're bringing in all of these user interface connectivity pieces so that third-party developers can create software and hardware that integrates right in with the Home application, so you don't ever have to leave it. I feel like before you had to leave it and go back to those other apps a lot of time to do various configurations, and so they're including a lot more of that now. And so who knows, maybe I'll kind of move from my Alexa app integration to Apple if they get their stuff together, especially with this consortium that they have going on between all of the makers of these smart devices. And that's the way it should be. You should be able to buy any device, and it should be able to work with any of those platforms without any ifs, ands, or buts. So I'm looking forward to that.
We could only hope. After Home, they moved to the Apple TV OS and talked about some of the stuff there, some improvements to the gaming and the Apple Games app, where better multi-user support for that, so different people can be playing the same game and have your own progress and that kind of thing saved in there.
Yeah, I kind of thought it was that way before, but I guess it's just kind of, it's not really there. You can switch users, but it's unclear. I think it only switches like your Game Center stuff, but not your progression. And so this is like one step closer to the multi-user interface that everybody's been wanting for iPads and Apple TVs since the beginning of time. So hopefully this 1 inch closer will help spawn Apple on to providing more of these features, because I think people are really looking forward to them. And then Apple TV Workouts gets picture-in-picture. What?
Wow.
I think what this was is there's some applications now that can take advantage of picture-in-picture where you could be watching Netflix while you're doing a workout through an application that you've downloaded. So some of this picture-in-picture stuff that came to iPhone is now kind of moving over to the Apple TV. And then AirPlay's getting better. Man, it can stand to get way better.
Yeah.
It is just not that great. Apple TV Plus is coming to Sony and Vizio TVs. I did catch a piece of that. That's what I heard, at least.
Yeah.
It's been available on other smart TVs and platforms, but I guess it's just coming to more. And then there's this one thing that they announced about an Apple TV Plus original called Foundation, which is a series of books from Isaac Asimov that they've turned into a theatrical series on Apple TV Plus, and it looked kind of cool.
Looked good. Looked well done.
Looking forward to seeing that.
They do some cool looking shows, and I know a lot of people are excited about that one as they're a fan of the books.
Right.
Well, finally, we get to Mac OS, the operating system on our computers, and the new name. They've used these California names for several years now, and it will be Big Sur.
And that's SUR, like surf or water related. Big Sur. For those of you who don't live in the U.S. and have never heard of Big Sur, you might be thinking, "What the heck is this?" But wasn't there a waterbed or a mattress company back in the day that was Big Sur mattress or something like that?
Could have been.
I seem
I'm
to
not
remember
sure
a
on
commercial.
that. Yes, but this is going to be they said the biggest redesign since Mac OS X came out, which seems pretty extreme, but
I'm not sure I agree with that, but we shall see.
Yes. And just for a geography update, Big Sur is a rugged stretch of California's central coast between Carmel and San Simeon. So it's a coastline there, beautiful place. A lot of new icons, a lot of new interface, new shading, new colors, new everything, new top bar, background, all of that stuff. They're really, really updating the look of Mac OS this year.
Yeah, they're refining it, and I feel like they're making it a little more iOS-like, and more on that in a moment. But every time they update the operating system, they tweak a few things, and there are some things, and like the new Mail, for example, one of the points he made out, they brought back the color, and I put finally on the notes because I worked with a low vision person, and they updated the Mail application that she used to black and white.
Yeah.
And so she's like, I have no reference or interface. This used to be blue, this used to be gray, this used to be purple or whatever now, and there's no way to add it back in. So I'm so glad that they've decided to go back on that. But we've skipped over a few things. New icons. The Finder has got a new top icon interface, a compact design. It's got a new sidebar, and back to Mail, there's new glyphs, the color for as I stated, and then they also can take advantage of the compact toolbar and sidebar and all that stuff. So everything's just a little more refined and succinct, and not so just in your face and hard to see. Photos, they talked about that also getting the sidebar. It's like
it's
iPad
the
OS
year of
and
sidebars.
Yeah, sidebars are everywhere. But on Photos, Craig Federighi did kind of a sample of where he was going through a lot of photos very fast, because Apple's technology called Metal allows them to write code very close to the instruction set on the chips, and so there's not a lot of delay in trying to translate these things, and so it's very fast and very fluid to use.
Yeah, and we've got, like I briefly mentioned, the menu bar is going to be a new translucent across the top, and new Wi-Fi and sound menu panels, and Control Center is now on Mac so that you'd be able to have those quick controls. And the Notification Center has been updated so it can use widgets as well, and you can kind of have everything in one place on your notifications, which I don't use a whole awful lot, but maybe I will now when it's kind of got everything there that I need. We actually were joking around this week that we really don't like having notifications on our Mac too much.
No.
I try to have as few as possible, but having the widgets and some of that stuff, what did they call them, widgets before, way back? That they just recently removed, where you could have all these widgets, and I would sit there for hours trying to find cool ones to download, and then I never would use it.
So I'm dusting off the cobwebs, and I'm opening up my sidebar on my Mac, which has the little widget view there. And there is a calendar, there's a weather thing in there, there's stocks, and you can add new little ones as your apps make them available. But I can see this being a real advantage, because I oftentimes use my menu bar with little applications to connect to a calendar or to look at the weather or whatever, and there's really no reason to use the top menu bar when I can slide over something from the side. It has a much better interface and is utilized much better as far as screen real estate in this little side panel that slides out. So who knows, maybe I'll use it more.
A lot of user interface improvements coming soon. And maybe the thing I'm most excited about is one of the reasons why I love using an iPhone and a Mac is that I can do text messages on my Mac, and they are now making it a Catalyst app, so it should be the same as it is on your iPhone. It's been pretty limited as far as you couldn't do the Memoji and the apps and that kind of stuff, so all of that should be added in now. The search is going to be better, redesigned photo picker, the Memoji, like I said, and the message effects like the fireworks or the different things that you can do there. So it'll basically just be a clone of what you have on iOS, which is what Catalyst does. And I was just saying the other week, it's like, why have they not done messages as Catalyst? Because that just seems like the most natural. Who cares about the Stocks app on your Mac? Messages is something where a lot of people spend a lot of time, and that's where I spend a lot of time on my Mac.
Yeah, and I think with this new update, it's going to give everybody just what they were wanting, the parity between the iOS experience and the Mac experience. And of course, Maps has been updated in the new Mac operating system, Big Sur. Whatever we said for iPhone and iPad, it's the same on a Mac. It's almost literally the same application. You've got the look around, you've got the shared ETA, you've got other improvements from iOS that have made it over to the Mac. The guides, the favorites, those type of things, indoor maps. So basically everything that you've got on the iOS platform is coming over to the Mac. And Catalyst is the reason why. Their developers are now going to be able to write applications, and they have been.
Yeah.
It's been fleshed out a little bit more now, where you develop something for the iPhone and you can also run it on a Mac. The goal is to simplify the process for developers. And so the end result for customers is that we should be getting more applications, more innovative applications on the Mac.
Yeah, and they're going to have a lot better tools to do that Catalyst stuff. Last year, I think, was the first year where they could start doing it. Apple had done a couple of their apps the year before, and so this year they're really adding in some new APIs and tools for the developers to make it easier, again, like you're saying, to pass from iOS and just kind of rebuild it to go onto the Mac, which is exciting. And they also talked about Safari. They've made a lot of improvements to Safari. They said faster page loading, 50% faster than Chrome, and new privacy buttons, privacy report buttons. So if something's not acting like it should.
Yeah, they have this little shield up in the menu bar now that if you're going to a website, you can click on it and you can get some information about how secure that website is. Like, are they doing third-party trackers? Is it HTTPS compliant? There are other indicators for that, but it kind of gives a score sheet of each website so that you can tell whether or not the site you're visiting is kind of above board or maybe a little sketch.
Yes. The one thing I did not see them mention, and I was looking on Twitter to see, I do not see multiple profile support like we have in Chrome or Brave browser or Firefox. And
that's the one thing that's keeping me from using it is the ability to have different instances so that I can set up different user profiles, because I have many different email users that I need to manage. Another piece that keeps me away from using Safari is extensions. They used to have support for extensions, and then in Catalina they raised the bar so high that it broke a lot of extensions, and many developers are like, forget it, I'm not wasting my time. Now they've kind of rolled back in the ability for extensions to be brought back in securely to Safari. And I did see something in there that they're going to be able to, developers are going to be able to kind of write once for like a Chrome or a Brave browser and then transition that over to Safari in a much easier manner versus just rewriting the whole thing from scratch. So that should bring back more extensions to Safari, and I'm looking forward to that.
Yes. So if you're not an IT type person like us, Safari is a great browser if you don't need a bunch of different windows and profiles, and it's going to be a lot better once this comes out.
And you can do custom start pages. Oh boy.
Yeah.
This is just a bunch of bling that nobody's going to use, but you can customize some of the when you first start up experience, which I'm personally not interested in.
Yes. Well, then came the big news. Tim Cook came back to talk about that this was a historic day for Mac, that they were announcing the transition to Apple Silicon, not silicone.
Silicone is what's in your boobs.
Yes. Well, not mine per se. So they are, for a long time, they've been developing their own chips for the iPhone and the iPad and the Apple Watch. And now they are, they've been working on this. They're going to start transitioning to using their own chips for Macs as well.
Yeah.
And it looks really good. They, one of the guys, this was one of the fun transitions. They dove through the pool and through a bunch of rock and down a long tunnel to the secret layer where they've been working on this. And
yeah, Apple's done this before. They started off with the Motorola 68,000 series chips way back in the day when they first started doing the Apple I and Apple II. Then they did this huge leap with a partnership with IBM and maybe some other developers and maybe some other companies, I can't remember exactly who, to develop the Power PC chip. And this was a huge change. And they made it through just fine. There was, of course, some bumps along the road. Some applications died and were never developed again. Others, they made the change and updated it after a series of time. And then fast forward to Intel, where they transitioned from Power PC to Intel because the Power PC chips just weren't keeping up with the rest of the industry. And now we find ourselves at this again. Intel is not keeping up with the industry. So Apple has said, you know what? It's time for us to develop our own chips. We've been doing it for years in our iPhone and in our iPads and in our watches and in our Apple TVs. Why don't we put these chips to work in our Macs? And so with that comes a lot of different things. One is it gives them a common architecture across the entire Apple ecosystem. So speaking of software and applications and Catalyst and all this stuff, Catalyst might not even need to be used. If you write an application for iOS, in the future, it should just be able to run on a Mac natively because they share the same code base and the same chips.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, and Apple has made all of their apps, so they'll currently work on Intel and the new Apple chips. The Xcode, which is what developers use to create Apple apps, it has all the technology needed. You just need to rebuild it, so then it'll work on both platforms. And one of the things that I had heard people talk about is like, well, how will you be able to run old Intel apps on this? So they've got Rosetta 2, which when they went to Intel, you could run old apps. But Microsoft and Adobe already have their apps up and running on both platforms. Obviously, Apple has hardware on this.
Right, but if you have a legacy application that's not designed for Apple's new chipset, then Rosetta is smart enough to translate the code from the Intel base to Apple's chip base, and it does it so quickly that theoretically you're not supposed to notice any slowdown because Apple's new chips are so fast they can emulate the software and all of these hooks and plugs so quickly that it just works. And then over time, they were saying like a transition of maybe 2 years or so, all of the older applications are going to be updated to run natively on Apple's code base, and then they will kind of sunset the Rosetta technology in upcoming operating systems.
So it's pretty exciting stuff in this world. It is a big change for them, and it gives Apple a lot more opportunity to really raise the bar on these processors and how our computers run, and I'm assuming they're going to do it well. They do have a quick start program where developers can buy into this. They get a Mac Mini with the Apple hardware so they can start testing their stuff, but Tim Cook did say that they will still be making some Intel Macs for a while, so like I'm not upset that I just bought my new laptop. They're, a couple years as this transition goes, and they said they'd have some new hardware available to the public by fall, which we won't even see Big Sur until the official release till probably September. So we might see a new laptop or something then, or a new iMac with these new chips. And, I have to assume that they've spent a lot of time thinking this through and making sure that everything works. I'm sure there'll be hiccups along the road, but I think it just gives them a ton of power on, pun intended, to make better computers under their own control and not have to be reliant on when Intel's able to get something done. They can just take it and run. Like with the iPhone, they've made their own chips, and they are incredibly better than anything on the Android side, where they're almost all using the same Qualcomm chips are the best chips there, and they don't really have any options. They have to build around that. So now Apple can build the full stack, the full vertical. They can build everything, every single piece of the computer. Like they still have to buy some little things like the modem stuff, but for the most part, they can build everything around what they're doing and just continue to make amazing computers that work really well.
And Intel computers, they're like you mentioned, they're going to still make several more of those. But one of the things that a lot of people rely on is running different operating systems on their Macs. And so I, for example, have Windows 10 installed on 2 of my iMacs here at home. And if you want to use a Windows environment, it's a great opportunity to do so. It's same with Linux. And so who knows when they switch over to Apple Silicon if there will be emulators to run Windows because the chips are so fast. Of course, there will be a VM solution. There always have been virtual machine solutions, but having the actual Intel hardware has helped it become much faster and work much better. So there might be some bumps along the road for those power users who want to use other operating systems on their machine. But I'm very confident that Apple's going to build the tools to make that happen and to continue to happen. So I'm not too worried about that aspect.
Yes. Well, and with the Quick Start program too, developers can now start making their apps universal, so that in 2 years, when all the older stuff goes away, they're already there. So they can update apps, this year to work on both, so that people that aren't rushing out to buy a new Apple Silicon Mac, they can still use the old one. So I have to assume they put enough thought into this, and the transition should be smooth. And I'm excited about it. I'm excited to see really what they can do with this, and if they can really, become the leader on this, on the phone and tablet side. There's no competition for tablets, but on the phone side, they've created these chips and they've really changed the game. So I have to assume with the computers, they will do the same, and sky's the limit.
Sky's the limit. Yes. I was very pleased with what they announced, and I'm looking forward to maybe using some of the betas on some of my devices once they have a couple versions down.
Yes.
We shall see. If you are interested in running some of these applications on your devices, in July, there's going to be a public beta of, I believe, iOS for your phone, iPad OS for your iPad, and probably something for your Mac eventually for the Big Sur. So those three. And probably for Watch and
TV
Apple TV as well. All of the devices are going to be getting some type of public beta eventually. So
in
be
July,
looking forward to that.
And then everything usually comes out some point in September. I did want to briefly mention, I saw as I was going through Twitter, the macOS Big Sur will be compatible back to most like 2013, 2014 computers, which is always something that Apple does well, is the backwards compatibility. You might not get all of the features depending on what your Mac has, but you will be able to update it. And then on iOS, it is compatible all the way back to the iPhone SE first generation and the iPhone 6s Plus. So if you have an older device, you might not be left out on these updates, which Apple has really put an emphasis on supporting some of those older devices. But you might not have all the bells and whistles, but you'll at least be able to update for the security and the added stuff that they are able to give you with the hardware you have, which I always appreciate that as much as I love my new devices. I know not everybody puts a lot of value in getting the latest and the greatest all the time. Well, we just talked a whole awful lot. We almost went as long as they did for the full keynote, and hopefully this will give you a little insight and some of our feelings. Is there anything that really stands out to you, Dave, from what they announced today?
No, the big thing is the transition to their own chips for Macs. That's going to be the big thing, and I'm absolutely looking forward to a lot of the features that they mentioned. And most notable is the new integration of Siri into the various iOS platforms, so that it's less intrusive and more useful. It certainly has a long way to go. Yes.
Siri improvements are always welcome. But I think it's all, they announced what seems to be a lot of really cool stuff, and just kind of giving everything that fresh, clean look, with, not changing things up and making everything triangle windows or anything that isn't needed. It seems like they're putting in a lot of features that are just going to make our devices feel fresh and be more usable. And I love good user interface and user experience, and it seems like that's where a lot of focus was. And the widgets, that's going to be on iOS, that's going to be a lot of fun to play with this fall, and just be able to see what you can do with that.
Absolutely.
Well, as I mentioned at the top of the show, we will be back with the regular format next week, but these Apple events are very important to us, and we really enjoy them. And I know, they take over definitely the tech press, at least for the week, and we like to give our take on it. So thank you for listening, and hopefully you learned something, took something away from this. There's something that you're excited about as well. Feel free to let us know on Facebook or wherever you follow us at, and tell a friend if they're saying, what did Apple announce yesterday? Say, hey, I've got just the podcast episode for you to listen. I'm sure we'll have As always, more information, or as we try out the betas later in the summer, we'll continue to keep you updated with what you need to know about this stuff. And so we will wrap up this episode. Get out there and tech better.
Yes, today Tim Cook announced that Apple would be closing down in a strange turn of events. They're just going to take all their trillions of dollars and they're going to pay the employees each $1 billion and they're just going to retire.
Nice.
So
that works well.
Good on you, Microsoft.